Today we want to consider, if you want to, the variety of different flows that there are. In other words, Jerry and Esther had an experience with Hay House last weekend. It is the publishing company that they are enjoying so much working with. And Jerry and Esther were invited, Abraham was invited to attend and perform at their I Can Do It conference. The environment was a very awkward, uncomfortable environment. It was in a convention center, warehouse sort of setting, and the air walls between the events were not adequate. They didn't have roofs on them. In some cases, there were only curtains, and so it was a sort of cacophony of noise. It was difficult for the participants to focus in the environment and hear what they wanted to hear. It was a wonderful opportunity, we said to those who were listening to us, to focus, because that's what life experience really is. You are constantly surrounded by a variety of things, and your ability to focus upon what matters to you and let that dominate your vibrational patterns is really what deliberate creating is. And so we were not at all unhappy with the environment. We thought it was a wonderful opportunity for people to understand the power of focus. But as Jerry and Esther thought about that particular event, they thought, if we had known when we agreed to do it what we came to find out as we were doing it, we would never have agreed to do it. It would have been a hell no, not a hell yes. Not even close to a hell yes. But then when they step back and they think of their association with Hay House and how wonderful they are to work with and how ordinarily everything goes very well, when they think about their overall relationship with Hay House, there is no question that that is a hell yes. We are getting, and Jerry and Esther are getting, this analogy from a book that has been written by a friend of Jerry and Esther's. His name is Alan Cohen. Esther considers him to be the best storyteller on the planet. And the book he has written is called Why Your Life Sucks and What to Do About It. And it is full of all kinds of insights that he has gathered and some of the things that he is agreeing with that Abraham is talking about. There is a section in the book where he says that when you are offered an opportunity to do something and your impulse is, hell yes, then do it. And in our words, you are really going with the flow in that case. But if you feel reservation about it, if you have hesitation about it, then don't jump into it. In other words, he says if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. And we say, not disagreeing with his premise at all, that the reason that something feels like yes is because you have flowed the energy toward it and everything's in vibrational alignment, and now the activity part of it is going to be one of ease. In other words, that really is going with the flow. But when an opportunity presents itself and it doesn't feel like that, it doesn't mean that it's the wrong choice, but it does mean it's not the right choice right now. It does mean that there's enough resistance still in the vibrational patterns that if you do say yes to it, it's going to be slow going because you are paddling against all of that resistance, you see. So, as you think about the guidance system that you were born with, which is the emotional center that is within you, and you realize that emotions such as joy and love and appreciation, those feelings of passion, those are hell yeses. Those are feelings of going with the flow. That is the feeling of being in vibrational alignment, not only with what you're thinking you're wanting right now, but that's the current that all that is source is involved in. In other words, that's that source energy that knows so much in the well-being of you and knows so much of everything that you've been asking for and is flowing in vibrational direction of what you are wanting. On the end of the scale that feels like that, there is no resistance, love, appreciation, joy. But on the other end of this emotional scale, down here where the feeling of despair is, the feeling of disempowerment is, the feeling of depression, those emotions are all about resistance. Resistance on one end, allowing on the other. And on the end that is allowing, on the end of the scale that feels so wonderful, is and your perception is all that matters, your perception of freedom and empowerment. And on the end of the scale that feels like depression and discouragement and disempowerment is your perspective that you are not free, that you are powerless to do something about this. And if you will think about all of the emotions that range all the way from those that feel the best to those that feel the worst. Everything about this range of emotions is about your perception of your freedom or your power. Can't you feel that when you are afraid, that it is about disempowerment? And can't you feel that when you get mad or belligerent or revengeful, that you feel less disempowered? Now, we don't want to give you the choice between fear and blame or depression and anger, because we think they're all, frankly, pretty rotten choices. But if we were in depression, we'd sure choose anger, because it feels so much better. And the reason it feels better is because there's less resistance in it. And the reason that there is less resistance in it is because you're going with the flow in the direction of who you really are. It is our absolute promise to you that source, that which you call God, it doesn't matter what name you give it, that source energy that is liquid love, that adored you before your birth and has adored you in every moment since then. That source energy is always seeing you in your highest good and is always calling you to it, always calling you to it. And when you follow the call of that which is source, one thing is always certain. You're dropping resistance off as you go. And with every particle of resistance you leave behind you, you feel more and more and more feeling of relief. So if you choose a thought that feels better than the thought that you were choosing before, you've turned and you're now going with the flow. But if you now choose a thought that feels worse than the thought that you were feeling before, now you're going against the flow. Do you remember it? Esther remembers it in her youth, that feeling of innocence. And by innocence, we don't mean that she was keeping all the rules that somebody else had assigned. We mean she was in that vibrational alignment of source energy, and she was appreciating someone or loving someone. And she remembers the day that she sat in a circle of catty, petty girls and talked negatively about someone who was not there. And she remembers the visceral feeling of the first time in her life turning away from her source in opposite direction. In other words, you can tell by the way you feel whether the thought that you are offering, no matter what the subject of your attention, is one that is going with the flow or against the flow. And the reason that a thought of appreciation goes with the flow is because that's what source energy always does. Those people who are praying to God to please condemn the others and destroy them. In other words, we promise you that source is not choosing teams and working against the well-being of anyone. And anyone who in the moment is praying for such a thing is going against the flow. And that anger in their gut or that feeling of despair in their gut is their indication that they are beating a drum that is so far from where their source is that they have affected within them a temporary disconnection is too strong of word, but resistance to the energy stream that is really who they are. When you are loving someone, you are going with the flow of source because source loves. And so many humans spend so much time looking for reasons not to love each other, looking for reasons to push against, never realizing that in finding a reason not to love someone, they are holding themselves apart from their own flow of well-being. And yet, when you feel that disempowerment and a feeling of revenge is inspired within you, we say, go for it. Because moving toward that feeling of revenge is an improvement in the way you feel. Now, hopefully, you'll continue to move up the emotional scale before you act on your revenge, because that revenge often brings more havoc into your experience. Your family and friends, frankly, liked you better when you were depressed. When you're depressed, you don't bother anybody. Now you're in that revenge mode, you're a problem to everybody. And so your family is not going to encourage you up the emotional scale, but we are. And your source is, your inner being is. from where you are to where you want to be, there might be quite a bit of distance that you're going to travel. In other words, as Jerry and Esther are going from Phoenix to San Diego, they're not all that happy out there in the desert. But they understand that it's part of the journey on their way to where they want to be. And so sometimes you've got some distance to travel between where you are and where you want to be. But as you make that distance on subject after subject after subject, before you know it, you hang around mostly up here on the vibrational end of the scale that feels really, really good to you. Before you know it, you have tuned yourself into a vibration where things just don't bother you so much. You can get yourself into a vibration of alignment with well-being. And people who are watching you will say, how is it that you can live in the same world I live in and you thrive and I don't? How is it that you're clear-minded and I'm confused? How is it that you're prosperous and I'm living in poverty? How is it that your body is agile and my body is stiff and tense? And we say, when you go with the flow, you thrive, and when you don't, you don't. And here's the thing that we most want to impress upon you. In the moment you turn in the direction of the flow, you begin to feel better instantly. In the moment that you turn in the direction of the flow. You can't lose when you go with the flow, and you can't win when you go against it. It's just that simple. It does not matter what you use as your excuse to beat the drum that makes you feel bad. You know, people don't get cancer because they write, I'm going to get cancer, I'm going to get cancer, I'm going to get cancer. People often get diseases that they haven't even heard of. And it isn't because they were beating the drum of that disease. It's because they were beating the drum of this injustice and this injustice and this injustice. They were mad about that and about that and about that and about that and about that. They were using thing after thing after thing after thing after thing as their reason to go against their flow. And when you go against the flow of well-being, you don't let well-being in. There is not a source of sickness. There is not a source of evil. There is not a source of darkness. You don't walk into a room and look for a dark switch. You don't expect to flip a switch which makes misty, inky darkness cover the light. You don't worry when you open the closet that the darkness of the closet will come out and cover up the light in the room. You know that there is a source of light which can be resisted. And we want you to understand that there is well-being which you can resist. And there's health that you can resist. And there's abundance that you can resist. And the way you feel is your indication of this overall stream. Now, the reason that we're talking to you in the way that we are is because we want you to get the sense of all of the different flows that are in your experience. In other words, there's your overall flow of well-being. And then there's the flow of your dominant relationship. And then there's the flow of your financial money. And then there's the flow of your physical body. And then there's the flow of your work environment. And then there's the flow with the person that sits closest to you at work. And then there's the flow of the way you feel about your boss. You've got all of these currents flowing within all of these currents. And whatever you're focused upon in any moment dominates your vibration. So, what about someone who has a physical body that's working well, and a relationship that's working well, and money that's flowing pretty good, and source energy who adores them, and a planet where the sun comes up every morning, and a planet where there is an abundance of food, especially in their environment, and they have a thing going on with somebody at work, and that's what they think about. They think about it when they wake up. They think about it when they go to bed. They think about it while they eat their meals. And they talk to their mate about it until he doesn't want to come home anymore. In other words, that's what they think about it. They are completely consumed. And it's not hard to understand because they sit next to this obnoxious person for 8 hours every day. And it finally got to them. In other words, it's easy to understand. But that one relationship is a very small part of their overall flow when they look at it objectively. But it is getting 95% of the airtime of what they focus upon. And so this person is using that relationship as their excuse to disallow the energy from flowing in all areas of their life, and then they end up sick. And then they say, oh, how could this happen to me? And we say, how could it not happen to you? You're using something as your excuse to push against the stream. Now you've got all kinds of things that are pulling energy through you, all kinds of life experience that's got a very strong current pulling through you, and yet you are pulling against this very strong current. It's going to beat you up, you see. So when you begin to understand that you have this flow, and we're not wanting to put it to you in anything that would feel to you like a threatening sense, because you are so free you can choose bondage. We're just wanting to point out to you that you really don't have any choice other than to go with the flow if you care about feeling good.